Okay, so welcome everyone to our second session in our Executives in Residence series in conversation with MBA students. And so today we have Nathan King, and he will be discussing about scaling up small businesses. I've had a preview of the presentation. It's really great. I'm really looking forward to seeing how you all react and interact in the session.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much, Jessica. I appreciate the introduction, and great to be here. Well, you've made it to Friday. Okay, some of you got Saturday to come as well, but the weekends for others are nearly there. So a little bit of background to me. So I started, actually I was an engineer trained, so my degree was in chemical engineering. Convoluted road to where I'm doing now is quite interesting. I won't go over too long on it. I then kind of did 3 years in an operations role. So I was on a graduate scheme where I worked in operations, in production, distribution, and logistics. Then I fell into marketing. Did 15 years of marketing in the likes of the known PepsiCo, GlaxoSmithKline, businesses like that, working on major brands at the marketing director level. And then I moved into the world of consultancy and coaching 7-8 years ago. And since then, I've been working with some larger businesses, but also, and the passion, and this is kind of, I guess, what's relevant for this conversation, is for small businesses looking to scale. So I probably work with probably north of 50 SME clients over that kind of time period, sometimes just projects, some of them longer term. My probably the classic kind of example, which relates to this talk, is a 3D printing business, which I've started with them kind of 5 years or so back, and they were around about 10 staff, about £1 million turnover, and now they're kind of moving up to about to break through 10 million, and they're at about 70 staff. So I've been doing all sorts of stuff with them, and I've got some good first-hand experience. So I guess what today is going to be about, because I'm conscious a lot of some of the content and the topics in themselves will not be utterly groundbreaking, but the idea is almost just to make the connections, and also then try and give some real life experience, so that some of the theory and concepts which you guys are kind of learning, no doubt, on the course, can then just be brought to life a little bit more and a bit more color. Okay, so that's the kind of context of why you're here this morning, so welcome. Other thing to say is this is very UK based, and Jessica has flagged that actually a lot of you are going to be taking your degree and then going back to whatever other country you're from. I won't worry too much about that, because the shape of what I'm talking about will be much the same in any country. So even though the numbers will be different, the scale will be different, some of the themes and some of the things to take out of this will be relevant for whatever country you're going to be doing your work in. Is that all right? Okay, so without any further ado, so actually just in terms of how I'm looking to do this, it's going to be a little bit of flip chart. I've got a few things here. I'm going to be asking a question or two as we go along. There's going to be one point where I'm going to need to kind of turn on PowerPoint, just because I just couldn't do it on the flip chart. I tried, I thought actually it's not working on the flip chart. You're going to have to be PowerPointed. So it's going to be a couple of PowerPoint charts. Along the way, as Jessica just said, put your hand up, either kind of like through the kind of reactions, or come off mute and just butt in. I'm fairly relaxed. So I'm largely going to be kind of done by in about probably 20 minutes or so. And then the idea that we have a good chunk of time, half an hour or so, for you to ask questions, and we can go into whatever you want to go into. All right. Good stuff. Okay, well, let's kick off. So first thing, I guess, with scaling small businesses, and I would encourage, whenever you're doing this in your businesses, is just try and understand the bigger picture first. So the first chart here is basically talking about the UK business landscape. So a few interesting things here. There are 1.4 million SME businesses, and they are defined as businesses with staff less than 250 employees. So that's just how the UK kind of defines it. And unsurprisingly, there is a lot more at the small end than there is at the big end. So just in terms of some of the numbers, micro businesses, which are defined as staff for between 0 and 9 staff, there's about 1.2 million of them. It's a bit less, but for rounding. The small, between 10 and 49, drops down to 210,000. Mediums, 40,000, and then large, which are 250 employees plus, there's 8,000. So, and in terms of the SMEs, so micro, small and mediums, they contribute around about £2 trillion worth of revenue to the UK economy. Okay, so that's just the context of the world of SMEs. And we're going to talk about scale-ups in a second. And you can imagine what scale-ups are defined as, I think this is a European definition, not just a UK definition, of if your revenue or your staff grows by more than 20% every year for a period of 3 years. If you fulfill that criteria, then you are defined as a scaling business. Okay, so just for context. So is that all right? Does that all make sense? We're going to come back to this at the end just to wrap up. So no problems, good stuff. Okay, so now it flabbergasted me when the numbers I'm about to show you are quite flabbergasting. So I'm going to ask you the question first of all: how many of those 1.4 million SMEs in the UK do you think are scaling businesses, i.e., ones which are growing staff, growing revenue, either or, every year for 3 years? What number? Anyone want to give me a go at that?
I'd imagine less than 50%.
Less than 50%? Any more than any other kind of? So we've got so less than 50%. Any others?
8%.
How many?
8.
8%. Okay. Less than 8%. Any further? No? Okay, cool. So whoever put the 8% is certainly getting more in the ballpark. So there are apparently 36,500 scaling businesses in the UK. So, and that works out at 3%. So 3% of the SME population in the UK actually are growing plus 20% every year for 3 years. Okay, so 36,500. Okay, now that's interesting in its own right. Now, what's really interesting is what they contribute to the UK economy. So we think about the size of the pie again, and of those 1.4 million, if you remember, they contributed in total about 2 trillion. What percentage do the scale-ups deliver for a UK PLC? And the number is go percentage rather than number, because actually it's more the percentage which will be the similar in other markets as well. Any suggestions?
35%.
So 35%. So less. Oh, okay, 35%. Yeah. Any others? Come on, I want at least one more person to kind of like be brave enough. I'm not that scary.
36%.
36%.
That is the game show.
I got to say, you played this game before, haven't you, Paul?
And Kita says 50%.
50%. Okay, so we've got 50. Okay, so Kita is in the right ballpark. The figure is 1.3 trillion, and it works out at around about 68%. So just to kind of, so 3% of the SME population are delivering over 2/3 of the revenue. So it just brings home just how important scale-ups are, not just for this country, for any country. So it then figures that really government and everybody else who are in the ecosystem, including business schools, need to understand what are the things which allow businesses to scale up successfully. And I guess that's the point of this talk. And I'm just going to give you some kind of like thoughts on that. So we had there a wow. Any other reactions from that? I was quite flabbergasted when I came to that. And this actually for me touches. This is kind of why I'm really passionate. I find business really interesting, and part of the reason, I've done operations, worked in marketing, done consult, all sorts of different things. And what drives me is just find it fascinating that businesses are like organisms, and you've got to kind of nurture them. That's not a static thing, so you have to keep working on it and keep developing it. And if you do well on that, this is the kind of results. And you think that they're coming out of the pandemic, and all our countries, whichever country you hail from, need to rebuild economies, grow economies, and the scale-ups here are so important to doing that. So giving and you may be you may be running, or maybe you're going to be future leaders of scaling businesses. And if so, you're going to make an outsized contribution to your country's kind of success. All right, so that's, I just thought I'd start with some of the context there. Okay, so what I'm going to kind of unpack now are that basically a lot of these things, again, in their own right, you kind of think, well, that's fairly obvious, but it's good to kind of like just have a framework for the elements you need to get strong over a period of time so that your business can scale up. And there are these 5. The first one is leadership. I'm going to unpack each of these in a second, but just so you can see it. So one is leadership. Clearly, if you haven't got good leadership, strong leadership, they provide the direction for the business. The rest of it is gonna fall. So that's really important. Having said that, leaders without good people is not going to work either. So that people is a huge. So leadership and people are super, super important, and almost usually the first play areas to kind of really kind of start. But actually, if you want to grow, you need to make sure you know where and how and have strategic choices. Then you actually find you've got a strategy, but you need to deliver it. So you need to think about the execution that gets into operations and customer service, etc. And then you can't forget finance. I'm sure I think Paul mentioned you've got a module on finance tomorrow. So it's kind of finance and the funding of the business, the kind of managing of cash flow, managing the P&L, all is critical. Otherwise, all this stuff can't happen if you can't pay the bills. So these are the kind of the 5 dimensions of which I kind of like work with my clients to understand where they are and what to kind of work on next. Now I'm going to come back to this at the end, but a concept which I'm really, really passionate about is the magic of top down and then meeting bottom up. So if all you do is do everything theoretical, and a lot of what I'm talking about is quite theoretical today, but actually you're going to miss the trick, because actually it then becomes too generic. But actually the kind of bringing real life experience, be it your own businesses, be it some of the ones I'm going to bring some examples to today, bring some bottom up reality to the situation. And then if you can kind of meet top down and bottom up, that is where the magic happens in terms of your planning and execution. So you kind of prioritize effectively depending on your own particular position, because every business is different. Every business operates in a different way, different sector, different dimensions. They're at different stages. They've got different things which are relevant for them. So you've got to understand your position. But actually, if all you do is just do it looking internally without any top down, you're not going to get too far. If all you do is just go to business school and never do anything, then nothing's going to happen either. So you need to kind of have this kind of bit in the middle where you get experience meets theory. All right. Okay. So now I'm going to. So any questions so far? No. Okay. Good stuff. So I'm now going to share my screen So what I do with my clients, I've developed a diagnostic tool for businesses which are at least 5 people in terms of size. And basically it's a diagnostic tool of where they are on each of these 5 dimensions. So what I'm going to do is just quickly introduce that, and then I'm going to break each dimension down, talk you through it. And then at that point, I'm going to go back to the first sheet, and then I'll pause for breath and let you speak. Okay. So I call this my scale up assessor, and this is some dummy information, but you'll remember from, you can see here behind, you've got the leadership, the people, the strategy, execution, and finance. And basically there's a kind of a diagnostic questionnaire. They answer these questions and they get different percentage results on each of those dimensions. And as you can imagine with this, I'll come back to this at the end, the more underdeveloped a business is, they're going to have a lower percentage. The ones which are further developed are clearly going to have a higher percentage. And that is part of the realization that there is a kind of overarching framework, and you can slowly work on it over a period of time to get to a better run, more successful business. But we'll come back to that. Jess, you got a question?
Well, yeah, we had a question come up in the chat, and we may need clarification on it, but Serby asks, would you say the finance and execution need to be repositioned in the dimensions flow?
Like you numbered it 1 to 5, and I saw the finance one was at the last. So
It's a good.
Does it need?
It doesn't mean it's done it. I've deliberately chosen this kind of jigsaw joined up. It's all of them. And interesting, actually, you make a super point. This is not a case of, right, start with leadership, go on to this and do finance last. Actually, often the things in finance you may need to do first, because if you haven't actually got some controls in place, you can't maybe even pay people to do the strategy and things like that. So don't see this as, I've got it 1 to 5 just as a sequence to kind of think about it, but they're all extremely interrelated, and hence you don't actually need to do one area first. In fact, actually what some of the things which come out is some areas are very strong and some are weak, and actually that's because the particular business and the people running the business have a particular leaning, maybe for strategy or for people or maybe for operations, and hence there's a bias for developing part of the business, but then there's a blind spot on other areas. So yeah, don't think this is a sequence in per se, because you do stuff in finance before you may do stuff in people. So it's an interrelated, and you need to be quite mindful of where you start.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Excellent, good stuff. So what I'm going to do now, so we will, we can go deeper into this in the Q&A section, but I'm just going to quickly just talk through each of the elements and how the types of kind of questions and types of things I probe on to be able to then they get a score in each of the areas. So if we start with kind of leadership, and actually one of the things about leadership we've got to talk about here, prediction, is there is a really important part of leaders' ability to be able to understand what's going on in the market, understand what's going on with customers, understand what's going on with the competitive space, and then actually try and plot a way through all that noise to, I think this business can double over X years, or actually I think we need to move this business from here to here, and I think it's going to do this. And quite frankly, it's crystal ball time here, and it doesn't mean you're going to be right, but actually if you're not doing and you're not making predictions, who is? So developing your predictive capacity, both for the longer term, but also actually interestingly, it's also the kind of medium term and some of the kind of day-to-day choices. So you've got to try and just, and being a leader is not easy. This is not for everyone. You've got to be very mentally agile to be able to kind of do the helicopter high level and then get into the day-to-day. So prediction is a key ability. It's critical leaders kind of actually set out the purpose and values and mission type areas of the business. If they don't set out where the ambition is and how you're going to get there, the business, particularly in the people dimension, becomes really uncoordinated. So part of a leader's leadership team's responsibility is to set the kind of the framework, the values of the business. Goals and priorities, really critical. This kind of runs through to strategy execution and indeed operations, is that you kind of need to understand finance actually as well, because you need to fund a lot of the goals and priorities. So having done your external analysis, having done your kind of, this is where I think it's going to be, what you're going to do in the next 3 months, what you're going to do in the next year. And you've got to kind of like take all that thinking down and be crystal clear on the goals and the priorities for the next year and 3 months. Next thing you need to do, and this is kind of when the business becomes bigger, because obviously if there's only you or a couple of other people in there, there's no one else to delegate to. But actually, when you get bigger, you can then start delegating more. And this is usually quite a useful, quite challenging for business entrepreneurs, because they're usually quite talented people, as I'm sure you guys all are, and they're actually like getting their arms around things and doing quite a lot of stuff. But if they don't let go and they don't, the expression delegate and elevate, there are things which leaders should be doing, which if they are doing all the bottle washing, actually that means they're not going to have the bandwidth to actually do the job they ought to be doing. So the ability, once you get more people in, to delegate some of the work which you had been doing before is another critical dimension of a leader's kind of capacity. And then having delegated, you then need to kind of like build the team and trust them, but hold them accountable to deliver whatever their expectations are. So being a leader, this is kind of your shopping list of a future leader of business, and it's challenging, not easy, and not for the faint-hearted, but very talented people are key to be able to do these things so that you can then take the business forward. So that's the leadership.
Nathan, can I just ask a quick question on that?
Yeah, sure, Paul.
And apologies if you were planning to get to this in later slides, but are there theoretical frameworks that underpin this value assessment for leadership, for example? And obviously this question applies for all the other categories. But how, and the reason why I asked this, for example, in one of our modules around leadership, we looked at different kinds of frameworks and definitions of leadership. And I can see like delegation, for example, that is something that came up in one of the theories, right? But I'm wondering what has informed the choice of criteria for this assessment, and then how are you coming to a validated answer on the actual assessment itself? Like, how are you saying that something is a 3? Obviously you run the assessment, but is that it's grounded in some theoretical framework, if you get where I'm going with the thought?
Yeah, okay, so there's probably two bits of the question here. One's about where the thinking comes from, the second one is the process. So on the thinking, it's come from a variety of sources. There's 2 excellent books which I would recommend following up with. So in terms of some recommended follow-up reading, so this book called Traction, which is it talks about an EOS, it's called Entrepreneurial Operating System. I think this is essential reading for anyone looking to kind of grow and scale a business. So that would be so. And there is a diagnostic in here which is comparable. It's 20 questions, mine's 25, and some of the elements I've kind of dialed up, some I've dialed down. So some of if you do the diagnostic here, you'll see quite a lot of similarities to the kind of structure, but I've put my element onto it. And the other one, which if you haven't come across it, is a book called Scaling Up by Vern Harnish, which is, and I can send links to both of these books. Recommended reading.
That'd be great.
So in terms of your question on where does it come from, I just pluck this out of my so where the sun doesn't shine. No, it's come from lots of theoretical reading, and there's others than this as well. I've done lots and lots of reading on this, and also lots of practical experience of operating in this space. So it is mine. I've developed this, but I can't say I haven't borrowed, begged, and stealed from other areas as well.
Makes sense. Thank you.
So that's the answer to that. And in terms of the kind of the 0 to 3 to 6 to the 9, this is a self-scored questionnaire. So I don't do this. So this is a survey which then leaders kind of complete, and then they have to self-score. And obviously, if they delude themselves and think they're 8s and 9s, then they're not going to get the balance out of it. But interesting, actually, something which I develop here is actually I try and get all the leadership team to do it, and then I run sessions on where difference of opinions are. So you get a lot of interesting kind of, like, some people score very high. In fact, I did this with a client a few weeks back where someone was extremely positive. He ran marketing, then the business is 8s and 9s, and then someone who was in operations had something down at 4. So actually that then created a really interesting conversation about where that was, where did the MD think it was. So actually, but this is really important, because if you don't really understand where you are now, actually you then may make the wrong choices on where to focus, and that's kind of like the point of getting a bit of a current position perspective. Does that answer your questions? Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Good stuff. Okay, then moving on to people. So in terms of so actually there's a concept in this which I really like, and actually having worked in a corporate world and I've had lots of experience on how corporates do it. Actually, how this is described in Traction is as good as I've seen in a corporate setting, and it talks about the concept of right people in the right seats. And so this is a combination of making sure you've got the right structure defined for what your business needs to do to grow, and then actually getting really good, talented people into that structure so that you can, as a leader, elevate and then delegate. And you can see here why leadership and people has a very, very strong linkage, because without people, the leaders can't actually do what leaders need to be able to do more of. So the right people, right seats, really important. Other elements here, you've got ones of engagement. So there's a whole, I'm sure you've done modules on engagement and how important it is to engage your employees. I'm trying to think there's a stat which I came across, which from a US study, which says something like, I think if engaged organizations, and there are particular measures on this, I'll send that as a follow-up, whatever the figure is, because I want to be accurate on it, but it's broadly like like 3, 4, 5 times growth, higher, faster growth than non-engaged firms. And then the other scary stat is it's something like about 90% of businesses have disengaged staff. So one of the kind of secret sources here is working on an engaged staff will allow you then to grow faster. So the scaling businesses will have engagement as an important part of how they kind of go about doing it. So linked to that, independence is really important. Micromanaging is not a good idea. One, because if you micromanage people, it's intensely time consuming for you as an individual, but also people hate it. So the trick with leading is setting good objectives, being there to support them and letting people get on with it, particularly if you've employed really talented people who know what they're doing. Why micromanage them? So letting a kind of degree of independence in how people operate is really important. And then focus on development. You know, there's focus, there's probably a budget, there is a realization that everyone's growing, everyone's on a journey. So how much is development of your people part of the thinking? So that's the element of people. Strategy. And strategy and execution clearly has a linkage on that, so we'll come to execution in a second. So strategy, kind of, you need to have a really good understanding of the markets. You need to make sure your proposition is differentiated from your competition, having understood the markets, which then links into the proposition. Then you need to obviously develop a plan, and the plan is kind of like across the kind of sales funnel, as well as and make sure sales and marketing are integrated. And then your plan then needs to be really clear and documented and funded, which then obviously links to things like finance and execution. So strategy's got various kind of dimensions which kind of go through. And then the last two, execution. So a lot of businesses, some people are really good at this, and some people just kind of think, well, it'll make itself, it'll do itself. You know, but both need to be optimized. And the priorities linked to the leadership dimension, in terms of like, once you get the goals and the priorities, you need to be able to translate that into kind of day-to-day, kind of week-to-week activities. So it's about translating it so it can percolate to the right level of the business. Data is really important, and in fact one of the things which I would be looking to do earlier in an engagement with a client is to really look at what data they capture, because if you're not capturing good data on markets, on sales, you actually don't make good leadership decisions. So the lady who spoke earlier about, do you do things in sequence? So things like data you actually do relatively early on to make sure that you're capturing the right information to be more informed, so you can make strategic decisions based on data, not just hunch. Meetings and process, deceptively important. Process usually comes a little bit later, because you kind of experiment when you're a younger business, but at some point in time, like battening down process is really important. But meetings I'd actually get to much quicker, because there are some key meetings which even a small business can put in place to get the benefits and act almost like a kind of bigger business, but actually just be a lot smarter in how you operate. Anyone who kind of worked in corporate world or any businesses before will probably have the experience of meetings which have been literally a complete waste of your time, and that's because the meetings haven't been really well thought through. The inputs and outputs aren't clear. Maybe actually people in the room don't even need to be there. You know, so actually structuring meetings to allow your business to kind of like work in an efficient way is really, really important. And then the last one there on execution, I see there's probably a question coming in a sec, is infrastructure. And that's both kind of technological infrastructure, but it also could be physical. So it could be like, you know, if you are growing, that's great, but actually there's growing pains of where do people sit? Actually with COVID, what's the kind of situation? What do they need to be able to operate remotely from home? So the infrastructure, some of the security dimensions all come into that infrastructure bucket. What was the question which came through, Jessica?
Yeah, so Venkata has a great question. The session is on scaling up, but this question is about scaling down. Do the 5 factors change in case a business has to scale down due to market shocks or other external factors?
That's a good question, actually. Scaling down, so almost scaling down, what, as in to kind of then shut up shop, or just to kind of almost regroup?
I mean, in terms of, say, if your projected strategy is not working in terms of sales, you're not getting the numbers as you projected, COVID, Brexit, or any other external factors, you want to go ahead and invest, but but the environment is not so suitable. So how would you, at what phase would a business scale down just to survive and make it more sustainable in the market?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I guess and obviously with the pandemic, many businesses have had to kind of, let people go or furlough staff. So I guess interesting, a lot of these things though, even if you do need to, practically, I guess people, so you might need to restructure your business, your leadership, your ambition may need to, so you may need to recalibrate your direction. You may need to kind of like, get new funding. So there will be, I wouldn't kind of say it's kind of going backwards per se, because this is like a system, and almost you can just, you can have the same meetings even if you've got less people. You can have the same questions you ask yourself on the ambition. You don't need to stop asking yourself that question. The outcome of that question will change, and you may need to recalibrate down, and that may have a direct impact on the people you need to have in the business. But actually, the structure and the kind of the systemization of it, once you've built it, you kind of don't need to jettison it. Obviously, if you're going to shut the business down and shut up shop, that's a different question. But I would be I think it's more about flexing down your kind of like your cost structure. But it does, a lot of these things still are very valid ways of looking at your business. Does that answer your question?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, good stuff. And then the last one, finance, which is an interesting, actually, part of the desire to create this diagnostic was because whilst I love EOS, it's really, really good, it actually completely missed out finance and was actually fairly noddy on strategy. So, and given my background in marketing strategy and a lot of other things I've done, I kind of thought, well, there's a gap there. So I don't just want to use something which I think is incomplete. So I tried to create something which is more self-encompassing, which is where this kind of thinking came from. So anyway, on finance, a lot of these things will be, again, you think, yeah, that makes sense. Cash flow and the investment into the business, absolutely critical. Really important to have cash flow models so that you understand, what's your run rate, your burn rate, to see where your business is at and how and if it's solvent. Linked up to that is a P&L and understanding what your underlying profit position is. Control, actually interestingly, controls and data and reporting come together a lot. And actually you might want to actually put in the controls and reporting so that you understand better your cash flow and your profit position. So even these things here aren't necessarily specifically in order. Sometimes if you've got really good systems and reports in place, fine, move on. If you haven't, you may need to put those in place to make better leadership decisions. So it goes back to the earlier speaker asking, is this sequential? No, all these things depend on where you are. If you've got poor reporting, poor controls in place, you may need to start in finance before you even think about leadership stuff, for instance. And then the last one, optimization, is, you've got to kind of, what I kind of see, I remember I kind of had a very, very good finance person who kind of like coached me in an earlier kind of my time at PepsiCo, I think it was, and kind of said, like, look, think about a business as you've got the top line growth, and then you've kind of got your bottom line. And what you're looking to try and do is, clearly you want to grow the top line. If you're in a growing business, you want the revenue to kind of grow. But what you want to do is you want the profit to grow faster than the revenue. So if you can imagine, you've got this sausage machine in between of kind of all this people, all this machinery or processes or delivery of projects. And you kind of, you sometimes invest ahead of the profit of the revenue, and that there is good reason sometimes to invest ahead of the curve. But over the long term, really, revenue should be growing whatever X%, and profit, you really want to be growing X plus something %. And if you can get that algorithm that way round, then you've got a very sustainable business, and you'll then be able to reinvest. If all you're doing, a lot of business models are actually aren't generating any profit, and it's lots of investors burning lots of cash. I do worry about those models for their long-term sustainability. If ultimately you want something which actually is profitable and you're able to reinvest in the business over a sustainable cycle. All right. Another question just popped up.
Yep. Should optimization be under execution?
I guess possibly, but I guess what's interesting is I did this. Operations is a really important part, and driving efficiencies, making things, the unit cost, reducing it down is actually quite often a part of an optimization plan. The problem sometimes is there's a really amusing cartoon which I saw, which has kind of some leadership type people around a table, and it was just saying, okay, so we've reduced all the cost, and now we've just got this box, and someone chirped up, oh, can we just get rid of the box? And so the point almost is that if you just let cost saving just go unchecked, you just remove the value which actually customers are looking to kind of pay. So what I love about really good finance people who actually take a broad perspective of the business is they realize that actually you've got to balance things. And even if the leaning of financial operations is probably towards reducing cost, there needs to be an investment mindset as well. And if you don't invest in your propositions, your marketing, in maybe in machinery, in new products and services, in innovation, actually all you're doing is going from what you were doing to a box and maybe out of business. So you do need to kind of like see optimization in the round, not just about execution. So I guess that's why, yes, execution and operations will form part of any optimization plan for sure, but actually if it lives in operations and that's the source of all optimization, then you can get perverse things happening. Khalid.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Just a quick question, because I come from an R&D background, the word optimization is a little bit vague. So to what extent do you optimize? Because you don't want to optimize to the nth degree because you might be wasting stuff. But how do you then say, okay, for now we optimize to this level? How do you decide then? What drives it?
Very, but if you think about kind of the process, so if you kind of, this is about where are you now? So if like, so on the leadership team, hopefully there's someone, in sales and marketing, there's maybe someone in R&D, there'll be a finance person, you can imagine a rounded leadership team all having their perspectives on where the business currently is at. And then you look at it in the round and go, right, okay, well, what do we need to do to prioritize to take the business kind of forward? So in optimization, the year everyone's just had has been very, very challenging. So I would be unsurprised if some of the priorities for optimization were about reducing costs, maybe having to let staff kind of go, maybe not investing in the latest marketing campaign or indeed the latest product launch, maybe a smart way to just kind of retreat, regroup before you then go again. But then actually when you kind of think, okay, you've come out of that, you start to see customer orders come in, revenues improving, then you should then hopefully switch some of the focus from protection to kind of growth. And maybe some of the R&D things, Khalid, you're kind of talking about will then actually start coming out. So I guess that's the point of the leadership part of it, is because you understand the market, you understand what's going on, you make predictions about what you can do with the business, and then that flows through in terms of goals and priorities, and then that's how finance execution strategy kind of follows through from that. All right. So just to conclude kind of my kind of almost kind of like talk at you and with a few questions, I just want to kind of go back to the first chart here, and I just kind of just talk through. This is not going to be. This is not kind of a set in stone, but just talk through what a scaling business looks like as it goes through these phases, typically with lots and lots of caveats. So I guess to start off with, so if this scaling business at some point has to be born, so they started off probably with 1 or 2, 3 people maybe putting some initial investment in, and what that phase at startup territory is all about trying to prove a minimal viable product, an MVP. And then what you're then trying to do is with that MVP, trying to establish initial sales base. So you've got confidence that there is something here which is going to fly. So kind of step number 1, you've got to kind of have an MVP and find a bit of a market. So then to go to kind of starter to kind of micro, you then need to start actually recruiting a few people, because well, actually to start off with, you realize you're doing absolutely everything. And there are even if you don't realize it, there's an MD role, there's a sales and marketing role, there's an operations role, there is a finance and admin role, there is an engineer. Now there may be the same person doing all those roles, but those roles are being done. But actually maybe the trick is to try and start, if you start getting a bit of the success, who can you bring in so that you don't have to do all those kind of like those seats. Yeah, so that's kind of key part of getting out of kind of micro territory, is hiring some good people so that you as a leader can kind of start elevating yourself. And this is a key concept which I'm sure you'd have come across before, the difference between working in the business and on the business. And when you're in this area, you're working heavily in the business. You're really sleeves rolled up. You're probably sticking things in boxes if you're in manufacturing, answering the phone call if you're in a service industry, flipping burgers. You know, you are in it, and there's not much you can do. It's actually a really tricky time in any business, getting out of this micro stage where you're really in it, and still you've got to do all the strategic stuff as well. It's hard. And I take my hat off to people who go through this, come through this period, and then start becoming into the small business territory. So when you get to the small business, you've got enough critical mass then, you probably, in terms of revenue, in terms of profit, to start building out your team, growing a bit of a leadership team, so that then actually you can start to go from in the business to on the business in terms of how you work. So that tends to be an important transition when you're starting from your leadership team. This gets quite painful, because some of the people you may have recruited in the micro stage may not be the right people to go on the journey with you, either in that leadership team or even actually where they should be even in the business, because maybe they're a bit they just got the right mindset, or they haven't got the right skill set. So all of moving up through this can be painful, and you might need some very difficult relationship challenges to manage as you kind of like grow through it. So you go on the business, recruit more people, and then as you kind of go from the smalls through to the mediums, the things going on there is you've probably got the next level down from that. So you've got the leadership team, the first line team, from that, and you then probably got some people underneath. So the whole delegation, elevation, you're working a lot more on the business there. And to a point where when you get to mediums, quite a lot of business leaders and entrepreneurs actually exit at that point. So maybe what happens here is somewhere between small and medium, often boards are put in place, non-exec directors are brought in, maybe a professional MD replaces the entrepreneur who maybe started the business. These types of things tend to happen. You don't have to, there's no rule which says you get to this size, you have to sell up and you have to bugger off. It doesn't work like that. But actually, typically, entrepreneurs love the buzz of doing this kind of stuff. So actually they may not be the right people, because the skills which got them started, got it going, aren't the skills which are going to need to take it onto a medium, onto a large business. So you can see here, and this is why I caveat all this, that every business is different, but there is this general shape here of, going back to the scale up assessor, typically down here, you'd expect scores of 30 to 50%, because lots of things wouldn't be in place. And then as you kind of go through, you should be, if you're in the mediums, you really should be over 80% in terms of the kind of scores. So the trick is, within your micro and small, how you prioritize and build and strengthen the individual elements of each dimension, so that you can then actually build the capacity and the capability of scaling a business. That's no guarantee you're going to do it. You've still got to do great decisions on what markets you play in, what products and services you develop. But the underlying structure and system which you're developing will give you the kind of like the system to be able to get there. And if you have really good people hired, you're making really good decisions, and you know the market really well, you can be one of those 36,500 scaling businesses, contributing outsized to the growth of your country's revenue. So that is kind of all I had to say in terms of like just to get to the point where I will then pause and open it up. That may have taken longer than I expected actually, but I have answered questions along the way. That's going to be when Jessica, you said it was only going to be 20 minutes, but you know, I have had a few interactions along the way. But any questions coming out from that discussion?
I've got 3 hopefully quick fire questions. They won't take too long. Firstly, I was just curious as to what the characteristics are of the companies that use this model, like that actually come to who are your clients essentially? Are they coming from tech, finance, whatever?
It's I've got clients all sorts of different. It's really more about the open-mindedness of the business leaders and how ambitious they are. So the people I work with are ambitious, open-minded people. And so those who are closed-minded think they know it all, so it's pointless working with them. And those who are just looking at steady state, business as usual, I'm quite happy being here as a micro, it's pointless working with them either. It's not being insulted, it's just like there's no work to be done. They're not looking to scale up. So the business I work with are the ones which aren't happy with being down here, probably aren't even happy about being, so they've got the ambition of being up here and maybe beyond, but actually, you know, aren't quite sure how to get there. So that's kind of the characteristics of the people who I work with. It could be very sector agnostic. My own background, you know, I worked in FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods, manufacturing. So for me personally, manufacturing, technology, some of those kind of aspects, engineering are a particular interest for me because that's kind of my background. But I've kind of done this for kind of restaurant groups. I've done this kind of thing for care home groups. So it's the thinking is pretty comparable for anything. It's, you know, just about kind of where I've got my central gravity.
And I was going to ask you as well, with the assessment, I recall you said it's a self-assessment, right? The companies will do their self-assessment based on all these different categories and sub-criteria within the categories. Do you do any assessments yourself on the companies? And is there, if not, do you think there could be a value of comparing notes between the self-assessment and then your like practitioner assessment?
What happened, the thing is with it, and I guess my experience is actually, particularly if I'm working with open-minded, ambitious businesses, look, they're all really smart people. Anyone who's actually got a business going, run it, growing it, actually, quite frankly, I take my hat off to them because they are talented individuals. So I don't go in arrogantly thinking I know better than you, because okay, I will know stuff and I will ask good questions, but they know their business better than I do. So I'm not particularly well placed to critique whether they have got a good handle on their business. The best way I've found is get the whole leadership team to do the same thing, and explore where the differences are. So rather than, I can ask questions like, oh right, you say that you're good on process, do you want to show me some of the I can ask them questions like that for evidence, but quite frankly, I would be utterly arrogant for me to think I could judge their business better than they could.
Yeah, it's an interesting point as well. Like if they do it as a group, I wonder if the outcomes would be different if they did it individually, because you always get a strong character. You might have rank on someone and they impact the assessment.
I know, well, the way I structure it is that each of them do it individually.
Okay.
And so they all get their individual report, and I have a conversation with each of them, and then we then come together as a leadership team, and I facilitate a conversation which says, right, having all said that, just so you know, so and I actually take the names off. Yeah, it's actually, and it's kind of like, so there is, so this dimension here, there's quite a disparity. There's a 3-point, whatever the gap disparity is, and that's where you then try and get the conversation. And actually, I learn a lot about the leadership team on how they handle that challenge. And actually, if there's a lot of aggression and a lot of kind of, then that flags there's some people issues. If actually it's a good open mindset, oh, actually, why do you think that? Who thought? And actually, it's really constructive. So the whole that session is usually extremely enlightening and gives me more insight whether actually I can really add value to this team or not. Because if they're not open, they're all, yeah, actually I don't really believe in the process. Then you can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
Absolutely. The last one was a bit of a light-hearted one. I was just going to ask you if you've done the assessment on your own business.
Oh yeah. No, so that's a good question. And actually, interestingly, it's a really, really good question, because the game I guess I'm in terms of consulting and it's really hard to scale it, and I have kicked this around, and I've got a small team which associates, and so it's not just me. There are people, but actually it's kind of I'm in that kind of slightly. I'm definitely in the micro territory, and I haven't made the decision yet on if I want to. So this is part of you've got to make a decision you as a leader whether or not you want to. You may be quite happy, or maybe you just think it's not differentiated enough. There's too much other competition out there to try and scale it. So at this point in time, I'm still absolutely a micro, and I would say, what would my percentage? I haven't done it for a while actually. I would be over 80%. I would probably add over 56%. I suspect I would be. So good question, Paul. You've been on fire.
I'm gonna be quiet now and let someone else talk.
That's good.
Thank you. Thanks for answering the question.
Yeah, my pleasure. Any other questions?
Yeah, Paul always comes with great questions and comments, but does anyone else have something they would like to ask, a burning question or comment? No, everyone's happy, satisfied.
Excellent. Well, I guess, and I guess just to kind of wrap up, kind of for me, I think just think about actually the kind of idea of working on the business and not in the business. If you can kind of get a sense of that as your business is developing, and you think, yes, I'm not stuck in the kind of always the kind of doing, then that is a really good sign that you are making progress. I know it's hard to measure it, but you can get a sense of kind of like, am I just doing all the doing stuff, or am I doing enough of the thinking about ambition, setting the strategy? So these are the questions as a leader you need to be asking yourself to work out whether you are being an effective leader. Because if you're stuck in doing the do, you're not actually being a leader. So that I guess is really, really important. Work more on the business, not in it. And to be able to do that, recruit good people. Because if you recruit good people, probably better at things than you are in certain areas, you can then delegate and elevate, and you can be the leader, and you can see the virtuous circle coming out from it. The strategy, the execution, the finance stuff, all important, but I would say disproportionately that dynamic of on the business, recruiting the right people, building the team out is a critical part of scaling up.
We had one more question come in at the end here. Jawahar wants to know if you hire interns for your own business.
That's a good question. Do you know, actually, interestingly, one of the things which I've relatively recently, I've been working with Brunel for probably 18 months or so now, and the kind of things I do with Brunel are many and varied. I come to talks like this. I had a talk a month or so with some entrepreneurial students, not quite like this, but a similar kind of conversation. And also, I think I mentioned to Jessica, I'm one of the facilitators for a leadership program, which is government backed. So I've got a cohort running at the moment. So one of the things I guess I'm opening my eyes up is just to the strength of what Brunel brings. And it's not just me, there's a few other people who help work in my business, but I think particularly on the research side and some of the dimensions which are very time consuming, I need probably more resource in this area. So actually Ainural, who is, have you all met Ainural? Have you come across Ainural? So she and I are actually working on a live client brief at the moment, which actually we're looking to try and plug in some resource to do some research for part of this kind of client project. So it's a live question, and if it works how I'd like it to work, I could keep doing some of the strategic work and some of the kind of facilitation work, which is kind of what I do. But actually, the thing which it's just going to make me sink if I don't kind of get other people to do more of this stuff. So there could well be opportunities in that space, and I think Ainural is going to be the key here because she's my conduit to tapping into Brunel resource. Okay, so maybe would we suggest some interested MBA students get in contact with Ainural? Well, maybe Jessica, you can, because I know that Ainural's talking to Danny Zagathi, I believe. Yep. So she's got a loop in with her. So maybe reach out to Ainural and just mention this, because I guess it's kind of like for me personally, if I'd be really, really selfish here, as I would like to grow my business, but I see part of the blocker here is kind of some of the resource. And one of my interesting things is actually things like that, very talented people, clearly like you guys, maybe you could be part of that scaling up. So so I'm interested to see how that goes. It's one of these things, you're going to need to have live opportunities to do something like this, but there is a live opportunity. So yeah, Jessica, I maybe suggest you reach out to Enya, just have a chat in the
Sure. All right, wonderful. Well, yeah, I'll definitely follow up on that. And in the meantime, thank you, Nathan. That was such a great presentation.